All right, I'm Tiger Robinson. My topic is how has the pandemic increased students' tendencies to procrastinate through screen time? So the reason I chose this topic is because back in March of 2020, when the school first shut down, I saw that my screen time dramatically increased. It was somewhere between 6 and 10 hours a day. It was awful. And I also found that when school resumed, that my tendency to spend time on my phone, even though my screen time hours decreased, as the quarantine implemented a habit of phone reliance in my daily life. So, raise of hand, who can name some apps that we spend excessive amounts of time on our phones? Lincoln.
TikTok.
Yes, TikTok. Time. Snapchat. Jonah. Instagram. Josh.
Cooler.
Okay, alright. So, TikTok, someone said, is a great example. It's just one of the apps that, of course, it's very popular, and I think many of us have resorted to spending lots of time on it during the pandemic. So in an article written by Tara Johnson in April of 2020, she explained that, first of all, in the Google Play Store, TikTok has 1 billion downloads, so it's a very popular app. Not only this, but in March of 2020, after the school shutdown, TikTok saw a 23% increase in usage. So imagine 23% of the 1 billion downloads, and that's only on Google, in the Google Play Store. Not only this, but in the week of March 16th to the 22nd, TikTok was downloaded 2 million times. So in my survey, I got 17 responses. All of them were from Brighton High School students, and I asked them, what were the daily amounts of screen time that they spent on their phones during this school shutdown period? Unfortunately, I asked them to give me an open-ended answer, so it resulted in kind of a strange margin, but we can still analyze this. So 13% of students agreed that they spent 5 to 14 hours a day on their phones during this quarantine period. I don't know if you can see that. That says 10 through 14. So 5 to 14 daily hours, that's a lot. Well, then I also asked my students, or the survey participants, if their screen time hours decreased when school resumed. And 94.12% of them agreed, yes, my screen time hours decreased. Well, this is great, so what's the issue? Well, when I asked the students if they consider themselves daily procrastinators, I got the exact same results. Only one of the students out of the 17 explained that they do not consider themselves a daily procrastinator. Then I also asked the students, what are some things that cause them to procrastinate? And they said two main things. Lack of motivation, kind of going into what Lincoln talked about, and distraction, such as smartphones. So in my survey, I interviewed a Brighton High School student. She's a senior. And we discussed these are her daily screen time hours during the quarantine. These are now that school has resumed. And one of the things that the student explained was that now that school has resumed, her screen time has decreased, but because of the quarantine, her screen time habits are much worse than before quarantine. Not only this, but she explained that she will often come home from school and be distracted by her phone and put off schoolwork until the very last minute. So she'll be doing the minimum amount of quality work to get the maximum grade. So this is important because this affects all of us when it comes to our quality of academic performance. So this is my mom. So these are my expert interviews. I interviewed Miss Robinson. She's an English teacher at Alta High School, and I also interviewed Dr. Hartman, who has a PhD in psychology. He's a therapist, and he's a well-known self-help genre author. Sorry, voice crack. So in my interview with Miss Robinson, she explained that as a teacher, she is constantly in competition for students' dopamine that they get from their phones. Because students, especially when they go home, there's no way that you can tell me that assignments, she was very convinced that assignments are not half as much entertaining to her students as their phones are. And then with Dr. Hartman, we discussed, he is a longtime practicing therapist, and he's helped lots of drug users and students like us who struggle with procrastination. And he's explained that drug use is similar to electronic device use, in that without our phones in public, we feel naked. We feel like something's missing in our life. Smartphones, similar to drugs, give us instant gratification and allow us to put off personal discipline. Does anyone know what this is by the raise of hand? Okay, so this is a phone substitute. It's a little wooden brick, pretty much. You put it in your pocket. This has been invented for people who are so addicted and reliant on their phones that they need a substitute in their pocket to make them feel all right. And actually, they're giving these to LDS missionaries who are so reliant on their phones but are unable to use their phones while they're in the field. So, what is my solution? The goal of my solution is to decrease screen time induced procrastination among students at Brighton High School. Here is a brief summary of my objectives. Overall, the objectives aim for the solution of informing parents and students on the solutions such as limiting screen time for students in order for them to gain back their motivation and eliminate their daily distractions from school assignments. And of course, those daily distractions consist of being on their phones and spending excessive amounts of time on their electronic devices. So, here are my works cited. Thank you for watching. Questions?
If you were in an ideal world, what is like the perfect amount of screen time someone can have that you're okay with, that you think is healthy?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because we depend on screen time so much in our life, like even for like Canvas and stuff, and for communicating with people. I would say we probably spend up to half an hour just communicating with people on our phones. But also entertainment isn't when you get too much of it, it can turn into a bad thing. But if you limit that, I would say 2 hours of entertainment on our phones would be a healthy way to limit our amounts of time on our phones in order to allow us to get our productive activities completed. So 2 hours of entertainment and then half an hour of communications and other things like that.
So with the parents, so you want to inform parents in like order to like you want them to like set restrictions on their children's phone, or do you just want them to be in the know?
Yeah. So for my objectives, this is the main objective that I think that you're talking about. So what it would consist of is counselors meeting with parents and discussing the threats of screen time, not necessarily persuading them to set screen time limits, but allowing them to cultivate knowledge of the threat of screen time, excessive screen time, and how it's impacting their students when it comes to their academic performance. Any other questions, Josh?
Would you count online school assignments as negative screen time?
Yes. No. Like negative as in bad?
Yeah.
No, of course not.
Do you think the limit of screen time alone will stop procrastination of students?
This is interesting because we read the habit book. Habits are cultivated through repetition of practice. So once we eliminate our screen time, we'll be less distracted and less reliant on our phones. And this will allow us to seek new ways of entertainment and also productivity, as it will give us much more time for, schoolwork and stuff like that.
Last one. How do you keep track of if the students are getting better at not procrastinating?
Keep track of what?
Like if the students are getting better at not procrastinating.
I think self-assessment, people can usually tell when they are or are not procrastinating. The interesting thing is, in my interview with Dr. Hartman, we talked about how most people want to be motivated, but they just lack motivation due to their daily distractions. And I think if you ask someone if they're procrastinating, they will most likely be humble enough to acknowledge their procrastination habits. All right.